Yeah, so good evening. As Jenny said, my name's Lily. Today I'm going to be talking about overcoming challenges in the pilot training industry, obviously, as the title says. But what I would say is don't let the title deceive you. I'm not just going to be focusing on pilot training, and I'm sure there'll be something that you can relate to, hopefully, throughout this presentation, if you're not in pilot training or hoping to join it soon. So I'm going to try and cover sort of challenges over and across the industry. So it'll be quite broad, hopefully, and there'll be some stuff you can take away from it, fingers crossed. So just a little quick overview on me. So as already said 2 or 3 times now, my name's Lily. I'm 25 years old and I'm currently based in Bournemouth for work. So I work for a company called Draken Europe, which some of you, if you're local to Bournemouth, may know. So we fly the blue Falcon 20 planes out of Bournemouth Airport. I moved over to Bournemouth about 4 years ago now to work for Draken. I joined on the graduate scheme and I've done various roles throughout my time in the company, and I'm now in the continuing Airworthiness Management Office as an Airworthiness Engineer, and I'm really enjoying it. So I won't talk about that too much now because I have got a slide on that for later. So yeah, I'll save some element of surprise. So why am I here this evening to speak to you all? Something I'm really passionate about is increasing participation and engagement in the aviation industry. So as I said, this is going to be quite a broad talk this evening. I'm particularly interested in increasing accessibility for minority groups. And I think the aviation industry is so vast and is developing at such a quick rate that we really do need to keep that talent pipeline strong and keep new experience, new talent coming through and getting them excited about all the cool stuff that we're doing. So that's why I'm quite interested in it. You'll see a little picture of me there standing next to a podium. So this is not my my first rodeo. That was a talk I did last year at the House of Commons with a fantastic lady called Rachel Gardner-Poole, who's very interested in the same thing as me. So trying to increase the diversity and equality in the industry, get some new talent in. She's really fantastic. So if you've managed to remember her name, do look her up because she's doing some really amazing work. So yeah, I do talks like this quite a bit in my spare time, and it's something I'm really passionate about. Ooh. Cool. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I got interested in aviation. There's a nice picture of me there with a butterfly which has wings, and that's probably the closest I got to something with wings at a young age. I didn't really get close to an aircraft until I was a little bit older. So I'll talk to you a bit about why that is. So grew up in West London, as I've already said, and I lived really close to Heathrow, just under the approach path into the airport. And I quickly realised that sometimes I'd go to the tip with my mum, so to throw away stuff from our house. And I realised that actually you can see on the map there that how close proximity the recycling centre is to Heathrow Airport, that I could get a few minutes of magic seeing the aircraft come in really low to land. So I soon made the link and then was trying to persuade my mum to throw away all kinds of stuff from our house so I could go to the tip with her, or I had an excuse to go and see the planes. And she soon then decided that it would probably be a bit more suitable to take me to Myrtle Avenue, which is a really cool plane spotting place near Heathrow if you've ever been there. So that was sort of my first intro into aviation, how I sort of caught the bug and knew that it was something I was really taken with. I wasn't an air cadet and I didn't know anything about the air cadets actually until I joined university, because a lot of my friends were air cadets. So if I'd known about that, I would have snapped it up 100%. But unfortunately, my school didn't have any partnerships with any cadet organisations in London. So yeah. Then during one of my first times on an aircraft, so when I was a little bit older, when I was a teenager, I got to go on my first sort of holiday. I was really excited. And it was a Thomas Cook flight to Cyprus, and the voice that came over the tannoy was actually a female captain. And I don't know, I can't really describe it, but I think a switch sort of flicked in my head, and I thought, you know, I'd sort of buried this passion down for so long and thought, this is never going to happen for me. You know, I've never met or seen or heard of a female pilot. I don't even know anyone who works in the aviation industry. So this is going to be a challenge. And then as soon as I heard that, it sort of confirmed for me that actually it's possible, and I should definitely start putting my foot on the gas and looking into it a little bit more. And you always hear that whole, you need to see it to be it phrase. And I do think that was true for me, definitely. There's been a lot of sort of commentary, I guess you could say. A lot of people like to have an opinion on whether or not you should take up a career in aviation, especially as a pilot. And I'm going to come on to some of the things that I've heard over the last few years, and certainly when I was in school and expressing that interest. So I really do think I just got to a point where I had to block out the noise and decide that I was going to pursue a career in the industry and hopefully do flying training as well. So that's a nice little summary of my background of how I first got interested in aviation. So it's definitely not traditional, but I'm really proud of it. So, right, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've heard about pilot training and engineering as well in the industry as a whole. So these are all true. These are things that people have said to me. I wish they weren't, but they are. So you should do an engineering degree if you want to be a pilot or an engineer. Now, I understand the piece there about engineering, 100%, I get that. But you actually don't technically need an engineering degree for either of those careers. So you definitely don't need one to be a pilot, and there are routes into engineering without having an engineering degree. So a lot of people in my company at Draken have done the apprenticeship route and worked their way up through that instead. So an engineering degree is not necessary, and it's certainly not necessary to become a pilot. So there are no flying scholarships in the UK. It's another thing I've heard. They do exist, and again, I understand why people might not think that they do, or might think that they're not real. They are a thing here. It's just quite difficult to track down the resources to unlock those. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on in this presentation, and just give a quick sort of directory on some of the organisations that offer scholarships, because again, I didn't know that until much later on when I was at university. So yeah, there are multiple scholarship opportunities in the UK, especially for PPL and hour building. Gets a little bit more tricky when you look towards the commercial pilot side of things, but specifically for PPL and hour building, they are real. Isn't being a pilot too masculine? Yeah, this one hurt a lot. I don't think that a male-dominated industry means that a job is too masculine for a woman. I think quite a lot of people like to play the card that women they're not interested in aviation, or they're not into flying. It's just not something they enjoy, and that's why there's not more women in the industry across all jobs. I'll prove that wrong later in this presentation, because I've got some stats I'm going to show you on that. But yeah, just because it's male dominated doesn't mean that you're not welcome and that you don't deserve to be there. You'll need top grades in maths and science. Not true necessarily. I think a pass definitely for GCSE and A level, but I've got a C in maths and a B in science. It's not, you don't need the top of the class necessarily. You do need to pass GCSEs and A levels certainly, but you don't need to be hitting the absolute top marks. So I wouldn't lose massive amounts of sleep over it, basically, is what I would say. If you ever need glasses, you can't be a pilot. I've heard this one a lot, and I can see why. But yeah, that is definitely an urban legend. You can be a pilot and wear glasses. In the military, it's different. So if you want to become an RAF pilot, you do need to have really good vision. In the commercial world, I think it's fine as long as you carry a spare. I don't actually wear glasses, but I do have astigmatism in my eye, which is why I couldn't join the RAF. So yeah, that is an urban legend. Being a good pilot is a natural born quality, not really something that can be taught. This wasn't said directly to me, but it's just conversational talk, I think. Disagree with that. People might disagree with me, but I think with the right instruction, support and hard work, you can achieve whatever you set your mind to. And that's not just in the context of flying training, that's anything. It's like learning to drive or doing a degree or learning something new. It's what you put in is what you'll get out. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I have heard it. So I want to talk about an individual who, in my opinion, she breaks all of those stereotypes that I've just spoken about. And a lot of people on LinkedIn seem to agree with me. So I did this post a couple of years ago, And I use it in quite a few of these presentations because I think it's just a fantastic example of whatever you put your mind to, you can achieve. So Barbara Harmer was the first female Concorde pilot, and she left school at 15 to become a hairdresser. And then she then went on and faced a set of challenges, obviously, then learning to fly while being an air traffic controller. Then she made over 100 job applications before she ended up getting her first pilot job. So I thought her story was really cool. And I mean, she's a real trailblazer. And I posted this on LinkedIn on the day that it happened, that she had been the first female Concorde pilot and flown Concorde for the first time. And yeah, it got a big response. Over 4,000 people reacted to that on LinkedIn, 152 comments and 101 reposts. So I'm definitely not the only one who thinks she's really inspirational. Sadly, Barbara passed away a few years ago now. But if I had to pick someone who really inspires me, and probably clearly a lot of other people from how many people reacted to the post, it's 100% her. I think her story is so relatable and just goes to show that if you want something enough, you know, you've got to block out the noise and not necessarily focus on where you've been and your background, but just looking ahead and looking forward. And I think anything's possible. So yeah, she's really inspirational. So I wanted to share that. So my first bit of flying experience, I want to touch on that first. My first flying experience and where I first started to learn how to fly was in the University Air Squadron. So some of you might know about the University Air Squadron, but I think it's the best kept secret in the industry, 100%. I think it should be much more widely broadcasted. In essence, you get a taste of the life of an RAF employee, and you get to learn to fly for free. Which is basically unheard of. So you get to complete the elementary flying training syllabus. Oh, sorry, my words. Yeah, you get to complete the EFT syllabus, so elementary flying training at a RAF base in the UK. You only need to have 2 or more years on your degree left to qualify for the UAS. And then you have to go through the fitness tests and the selection process, interview and all of that good stuff. But once you're in, it's fantastic. You get to do loads of adventurous training, learning to fly. You get to do PAX flights on different RAF aircraft. So I went and sat as a passenger on an air-to-air refueling exercise on a Voyager. That was fantastic. Been on a Hercules, went on a Chinook once. Really amazing opportunities. And I think at this point in my life was this experience confirmed for me that I was definitely hooked on aviation. I think I'd tried for a long time after being told at school and when I was younger that it was going to be too difficult to pursue any career in aviation, specifically a flying one would be extremely hard. But yeah, this sort of confirmed for me that I'm going to have to keep chasing it because it was just fascinating. I had the best time, made friends for life. So I'd definitely recommend, if you know of anyone who's in university, or if you are in university or hoping to go to university, definitely go to the Freshers' Fair and find your local University Air Squadron because it is fantastic. So as mentioned before, I couldn't join the RAF because I have astigmatism in my eye, which does not rule me out from flying. So I am currently training to get my PPL, which has taken a little bit longer than I expected. So my school that I was at previously, which was BCFT, which was really convenient because I work at Bournemouth Airport. BCFT were based at Bournemouth Airport. They actually closed late in the year last year. So that was disappointing. And then I've had to change schools since, which has obviously delayed things a little bit. And the weather's not been great, as you guys know, but it's lovely now. So fingers crossed that it should be finished soon. I've had a really positive experience actually doing the civil training route. I don't really have anything negative to say. I've really enjoyed the flying, really built my confidence. I've got a fantastic instructor that I've got a really good relationship with, which definitely helps. And I've passed all my theory exams now, which is great. It was good to get them out of the way. And now I've only got a couple of hours left before my final handling test. So hopefully that'll come just in time for summer, and then I can start taking some of my friends flying. So yeah, there's a few pictures me there doing some flying stuff. But yeah, it's great. Honestly, it sort of, my world revolves around it at the moment. It's fantastic. So how have I managed to do that? Because flying training is extremely expensive, and I'm going to come on to the problems that causes in the UK, and for me specifically as a student of the pilot training system, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But it's been possible for me because I've had flying scholarships, as I've mentioned earlier. So a quick run through of these organisations. This was just off the top of my head, ones that I know are out there and available. I've personally had 2 Air League scholarships, and I've had 1 scholarship from the British Women's Pilots Association, which was the Flying Start Scholarship. So I was honoured to receive that. This is a very prestigious scholarship and very competitive. That goes for all 3 of the scholarships I've had. Really, really grateful. I did put the University Air Squadron on there as well, just because it was a means to learn to fly for free. So I sort of put it in that category as well. So, but yeah, there's quite a few organisations on here. They either offer flying scholarships for partial, so for hour building, or for the full PPL. So the Honourable Company of Air Pilots, they offer a full PPL scholarship. There's the 2E pilot cadet scheme on there as well. So that's running at the moment. They're doing all the recruitment for that right now. So they're the first airline actually to launch a fully funded pilot training scheme in a really long time, which is fantastic to see that steps are being taken in the right direction. It's really great. There's a list on the BWPA website of all the different flying scholarships that are available. So if you know of anyone who is wanting to apply, or if you're wanting to apply yourself, do have a look on there. It should be kept up to date quite regularly, and then you can find all the relevant resources on there. So my current job, so I touched on that a little bit earlier. So in a little bit more detail, as I mentioned, I've done a few roles now at Draken, and I'm now in the camo organisation, working as an Airworthiness Engineer, having a great time. I really, really love my job, and I work in a fantastic team. So some of you probably know what a camo does, so I won't labour it too much, but we basically just ensure that the aircraft are airworthy and ready to fly in compliance with all the regulations. So we review things like service bulletins, airworthiness directives, documentation that comes from regulators and manufacturers of critical parts on the airframe. So things like engines, APUs, and then obviously the airframe itself. We also build aircraft maintenance programs as well. So I'm doing one of those right now, which is definitely tasking, but I'm really enjoying it. It's a really fantastic company to work for. And I'm sure, this being obviously the Christchurch branch, a lot of you guys will probably know of Draken. So we provide operational readiness training to mainly the RAF and the Royal Navy on our main fleet, which is the Falcon 20. But we do have lots of other platforms that provide a variety of services. So we now have the L159, which is the Red Air Aggressor up north, working with the RAF. So I think the Falcon turned 60 this year as well. So quite impressive that they're still flying, but it's a fantastic job, fantastic fleet and great people. So again, if you are local, do check out the opportunities that we have at Draken. So I did say I was going to include some stats, so here they are. Pretty sad, to be honest. So they're not from 2023. I can't find anything more up to date than this, but I just want to run you through some of these. So in 2018, 5.18% of the world's commercial pilots were female. So that's pretty bad, to be honest. It's not great. In 2021, 4.7% of the commercial pilots in the UK were female. Now, the UK, in terms of how well we're doing in comparison to other countries, we're not doing very well. I think in the list we're somewhere towards the bottom, which is not great. I think India are the best. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I think they're about 12 to 14% maybe female pilots at the moment, which is pretty good, and especially in comparison to us. I don't know if that number has increased, and obviously that will vary depending on what airline you fly for. So different airlines will have higher percentages of commercial pilots, but this figure is obviously for total across the UK. Hopefully that will improve in the next few years, but that's the latest I could get, and obviously it's not great. In 2020, 7% of pilots in the UK were from a BAME background. Again, it's pretty poor. If you think about the UK demographic and how we're reflecting that in the flight deck, it's not great. And then in 2022, 16.5% of engineers in the UK were female. This stat actually is improving year on year. So that's a positive change. I think it's slow moving, but it is getting there, which is really great to see. So these are just a snapshot to give you an idea of what is going on at the moment in the UK in terms of the aviation industry. I know it's quite role specific, but I don't imagine that the numbers are wildly different in the variety of roles that we have available in the aviation industry. I imagine it's probably quite a similar tone. Right, then this is probably the slide I'm most fascinated about. So I reached out to the RAF Air Cadets who did a survey last year, and this was based on 2,000 cadets responded to this. And I think the data that's come out of this is really interesting. It's really eye-opening, actually. So this is obviously younger generation, up to 20 years old, I think it is, when you age out of the Air Cadets. So looking at aerospace careers, 55% of female cadets said they were considering one, compared to 78% of male cadets. So I'd say 55% is a pretty good number, especially when, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people tend to use the excuse that women just are not interested in a career in aerospace or a career in aviation. This number definitely says otherwise, which I think is really positive. Then only 6.6% of female cadets said they didn't want to pursue any flying, which leaves 93.4% really wanting to learn to fly and wanting to pursue that, maybe as a career, maybe as a hobby, but they want to take it forward in some way. So that is very interesting to me. And then if you tie that in with this last stat here, when asked if they would apply for scholarships in the future, 71.8% of male cadets said that they would, compared to just 26.8% of female cadets. So there's a disconnect there, 100%. I don't know what that could be, so I'm not going to comment, but I mean, something's not connecting there, because there's an overwhelming response of female cadets who really want to learn, but they're not willing to apply for the scholarship. So why is that? Is it because they're not confident? Are they being told otherwise at school? I don't know. I think you can only assume, but really great that they're part of the RAF Air Cadets, who are really taking some positive steps, and they've got really great programs in place to try and support female cadets who are wanting to move forward and learn to fly, which I think is great. So, but yeah, very eye-opening, very interesting to me. Okay, this part is what I mentioned earlier. So the cost of flying training is extortionate. There's no sugarcoating it, to be honest. It's really expensive. In my opinion, this is the biggest hurdle you have to overcome if you want to learn to fly, whether that's as a hobby or the full commercial route. Both are expensive. Even to get a PPL by itself is going to cost you a lot of money. Even with scholarships here and there, if you can't get a full PPL scholarship, you're still going to be looking at quite a large bill with a flying school. So you can see here from the data, so this shows the cumulative costs of one flying school, which is FTA Global, which unfortunately have now gone into liquidation as of this week. But I did get this data from their site. So cumulative costs of flying training, this is over the space of 12 months. So you can see there in the first column as well, to pay that much money up front, £30,000, that's a huge financial risk for some of these students. And a lot of this goes unregulated, as far as I'm aware. So if the school does go into liquidation, they lose that money. So it's a massive financial risk, notwithstanding the fact that, I mean, I can't afford that, to be honest. It's a lot of money. So yeah, it's a huge barrier and a huge problem. And I found a quote here from UK Flying, which does sum it up quite well. Securing funding is usually the biggest challenge for any aspiring pilot, with training costs currently between £65,000 and £112,000, and no airlines willing to pay for the complete training. Individuals are left with little option other than to secure funding themselves. Now, the problem with securing the funding yourself is if you wanted to get a bank loan secured against an asset, so for example, a house, you still have you don't get a holiday period on that loan. So you have to start paying the loan off as soon as the money is released. So how are you going to do that and also work to pay off the loan? It's simply not possible. It's too much. So then you're left with modular training, which is what I'm doing, and a lot of people I know have done this route. So you pay as you go flying, basically. So you do it in chunks, as it shows on here, basically at FTA Global. That would be a standard modular training route for a commercial pilot's license, I'd imagine. You pay it in chunks. There's no big upfront costs that are going to leave you where you're out of pocket for loads of money if the school does go into liquidation. And you just pay as you can afford it and as you go. So normally the most feasible way to do it, unless you have the option to do an integrated course, which is where you pay the whole cost over a shorter amount of time, and you do it as a sort of full-time job. So full-time study, basically. So yeah, I would say this is a really big problem and a big challenge at the moment for the industry, but there are steps taken in the right direction at the moment. So TUI have got their cadet program, which is going to be fully funded pilot training, and then you get a job with TUI at the end, which is really fantastic. So hopefully more airlines will maybe start opening up a similar scheme. I'm not sure, but we'll wait and see. So current challenges, and again, this is sort of from my perspective, so based on my experiences to date, and not just centered around pilot training. I think there's a piece here for the whole aviation industry. So obviously role specific, the cost of pilot training in the UK, as I've just said, is extortionate. That's going to put a lot of people off considering this career, 100%. It's not going to be feasible for a lot of people, is probably what they're going to think at first, especially if their first interaction with a pilot training organisation is an integrated course costing in excess of £100,000 with no way of paying that. It's probably going to put them off, and especially if they don't know anyone who's doing a modular training route to tell them otherwise, or to sort of act as their support network, then it's going to be difficult for them. So I do think that is a huge barrier. Stereotypes around the careers in the industry still present. I would be surprised if sort of no one had thought or heard of some of those stereotypes and those misconceptions that I've spoken about on an earlier slide, because most of the people who I've spoken to have said they've heard something very similar, and they are still knocking around today. So I do still hear of comments like similar to that being made, and I think whilst those stereotypes still exist, people are just going to be put off again. They'd probably rather do something that's going to be a little bit easier and not have as many sort of stereotypes and misconceptions around it. And then diversity statistics still show that there's a lack of representation, which means in turn then there's a lack of role models for younger people, for anyone really who wants to join the industry. But it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because you can't get more role models and more people interested in a career without lifting those barriers, without lifting those stereotypes and the misconceptions, and providing people with the resources that they need to make an informed decision about a career in aviation. And then if you want to become a pilot without that massive financial burden of training. So yeah, it's a difficult one. And this is why I put it in a continuous cycle pattern, because it does seem to replicate that a little bit. Then lastly, lack of data around what is effective to increase diversity and just understanding what works. I think just from research recently for doing this presentation and ones that I've done previously, the data just doesn't seem to be there. We don't really know exactly what is engaging with these minority groups, with younger people as well, to try and get them interested. I'm not too sure that we have a good grasp on that yet. And I'm sure that will come in the years to come. And I think the thing with equality and diversity and inclusion, as a lot of businesses will know, is it's not an overnight change. It's something that has to happen over a really long period of time, which often means that the data is quite lagging as well. So you don't often see what works and what the right solutions are and the numbers increasing until, years have passed. So I'm sure the industry is going to get there, and it's getting a lot of recognition now from the government and from the DfT. So I think it's moving in the right direction. Hopefully the data will come eventually. So I've just put here, because obviously I'm very conscious I don't want to just spend this whole session complaining about all the problems and the ways in which it's really difficult. I want to try and give some proactive steps on how you yourself can try and move forward and sort of keep the passion alive for aviation, or how you can support someone if if it's, you know, a daughter, a son, a brother, a niece, a colleague, a friend. I want to try and make this presentation relatable for you. So if you want to fly or get into the aviation industry, I think trying to get experience in the industry first is a great step. So any job that you can pick up in the aviation industry is going to give you a really great, well-rounded insight into, one, if it's for you, and if it is where you want to stay for the majority of your career. But also, if you want to become a pilot, it gives you really good awareness of all of the different requirements that it takes to get an aircraft in the air. So I think it gives you really good spatial awareness of the industry as a whole. And the quicker you get that experience and you get a foot in the door, the easier the rest of it becomes, in my opinion. So even if you can just get a little bit of work experience, or you can offer some work experience to someone, I think that's fantastic. If you want to become a pilot, don't be afraid to talk about the financial challenges that surround the training. I think finance and money is a difficult subject for a lot of people. And I think the more we talk about it and the more we get comfortable with how much this actually does cost people and how much financial risk some of these schools put students in, the easier it will become for everyone, but definitely for the students in training. Because I think you feel like you're the only one, and that's just not the case. I think I felt like that for a long time, but until I'd done a few scholarships and actually started my job in industry and met more people and sort of widened my network, I've met so many people who are in a similar situation to me, but that's not clear to you, I think, when you first show an interest. So yeah, you're not alone if you are looking at learning to fly and you're scared by the prices. I get that 100%. I think one thing you can do, and one thing I've seen a lot of people who are campaigning on this issue do, is write to your local MP. So Baroness Veer, who is the Secretary for Aviation, Maritime and Security, she is aware of the cost challenges, I think, with this. And that's only from people writing to their MPs and eventually having a meeting with her about this issue. So I would advise maybe doing that if it's something that you're passionate about. Build a strong support network that you can rely on with a great community of resources. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides, I think, just about what the organisations are that you can refer to in the first instance. But yeah, the support network is key. I think with anything, I think pilot training is a huge challenge, and it's much easier if you have people rallying around you there to support you. The same with anything. I think if you're studying a new subject, as I said earlier, or learning to drive a car, anything, learning something new, it's good to have a support network that can keep you motivated and keep you uplifted. Challenge where possible and where needed. So again, on that misconceptions piece, on some of those stereotypes, even little things like, oh, well, you need 20/20 vision to learn to fly, or, you know, you're going to need an A star in maths and physics and all this stuff. I think don't be afraid to push back and challenge that. And if you're ever feeling as if you don't belong in the industry, there really is a place for everyone, and there's jobs. That the amount of jobs and the scale of what you can do and what you can achieve is huge. So I wouldn't let anything put you off. And if you are feeling like someone is pushing, then challenge back, I would say. And have your bucket of motivation ready. So I went to a dinner a few weeks ago, and one of the keynote speakers was the Director of Flight Operations for British Airways, and he was giving everyone some advice on what to do in terms of being prepared for pilot cadet schemes and pilot training, and just some practical steps you can take. And one that really stayed with me was having this bucket of motivation. And it's interesting because I think it fluctuates. You know, some days you have good days, some days you have bad days, like everything in life, but you shouldn't ever let it run dry. I think that's when you're in the danger zone. But as long as you stay motivated and you've always got something left in the tank, you're going to feel more motivated to do more on some days and probably feel worse on others. But it's knowing that that's fine, but you keep going anyway. I think that's really important. That's something that I'm definitely going to carry through on this pilot training journey, because yeah, I'm not a very patient person, and I'm definitely learning that I have to be, and I've got to marry that up with some motivation, and hopefully I'll get there in the end. So then if you want to support someone, I think spreading awareness of the career paths available in the industry, because it's constantly growing and constantly innovating at the moment. And again, I'll talk about some of that a little bit later. But I know a lot of you will probably be professionals in industry listening to this talk, so do spread awareness of those career paths, keep promoting them to young people, to anyone who shows an interest. There's so much going on, and there really is a role for everyone, in my opinion. There's room for us all. Spread awareness of the financial challenges associated with pilot training. As I've said, I think it's good that we lean into the conversation and we don't try and act like it's not a problem, because it is. Be that support network for the people around you who want to get into the industry or learn to fly, but don't really know where to start. So maybe try and help them, guide them with some resources, tell them about the Royal Aeronautical Society, because you get access to resources, these fantastic lectures. So it's definitely a good pool of resource. And then again, challenge where possible, champion that individual, build their confidence and inspire them, especially if you are an aviation professional in this talk. Be that role model for someone. You might not know it, but you probably are a role model for someone already. So yeah. Okay, so yeah, I spoke about building that support network, and I want to talk about some really fantastic organisations that have really helped me actually along the way, and some that I just think are worthy of a spot in this presentation, because they do some amazing work. So the Aviatrix project, they offer flight taster experiences that you can apply for. So if you're thinking about learning to fly or a career in aviation, you can apply for those. I do a lot of volunteering for them. They're a really fantastic charity. The sort of founder of the charity is a DFT aviation ambassador, fantastic lady called Kanchana. And yeah, the charity is really amazing, and the work they do at schools and outreach programs really does make a huge difference. British Women's Pilots Association is something that I volunteer for, and obviously I've received a scholarship from them. I've really built such a strong community of women in the organisation that I can really relate to, and I have met some amazing friends. So I think that's definitely one to look at as well. The Air League was the organisation that gave me my first flying scholarship, and I thought, oh my God, someone believes in me, this is great. They are really amazing, and the same as the BWPA, I've made friends for life in the Air League. I'm still friends with the people I did my first flying scholarship with up at Tayside Aviation in Scotland. It's really a great charity, and they do so much, not just in the flying space, but in engineering. They offer drone scholarships as well, and they offer so many events for young people as well throughout the year to build that network, get to know aviation professionals and people who are in a similar position to you. So definitely recommend them as well. Fantasy Wings is another amazing organisation. So they offer support to BAME communities who are interested in flying or the aviation industry. So they run these fantastic lectures. I think they offer some sort of scholarship program as well, but I don't know too much about that, but they are doing some amazing work in this space as well. Obviously, the Royal Aeronautical Society had to get a shout out here. So another really great one. And I think we're talking about it at the Branches conference last weekend. It's a very well kept secret, I think, especially the local branches. And I think once you tap into that, there's a whole network of people there who are ready and waiting to get to know you and hear about your career. And yeah, there's loads to get involved with. So definitely a great one. Elevate Her is quite a new organisation, which I went to an event for that last weekend. So they're an online platform that offer resources to encourage and inspire women into flying. So that could be GA or commercial, whatever takes your fancy. The owner of Elevate Her also works for Transair. She's a lady called Catherine Maloney, really fantastic and inspiring. And the community she's building through that online platform is really amazing. So definitely recommend that as well. RAF Air Cadets. I feel like I really missed a trick here with the Air Cadets. If I'd known that was a thing when I was in school, I would have been top of the list to sign up, but unfortunately I didn't. So really amazing organisation. Clearly a lot of my friends were part of it, who were on the University Air Squadron with me, and you can see from that data that I presented earlier, really taking positive steps in the right direction, really trying to make a change and support cadets as best they can, which I think is fantastic. Then women gliding, I've got that on there. I'm not a glider pilot. I've done one flight and I did feel a little bit airsick, I've got to be honest. But I did one flight with Liz Sparrow, who runs the Women Gliding organisation. And although I'm not a glider pilot, I feel really connected and supported with that by that community. They're just all fantastic. And I think you only have to be in the room with, I think it's all glider pilots really, not just female glider pilots, but glider pilots are really passionate about the sport. And I think it's just infectious. I love being around them. I just think they're fantastic. So yeah, recommend women gliding, especially if you are obviously a glider pilot. So opportunities on the horizon. So where is the industry going and why are topics like this important to discuss? So there's quite a lot of work going on with a programme called Generation Aviation, which was launched by the Department for Transport in Q4 last year, I think. So I went to the kick-off event. There's a nice picture of me there with a fellow Air League scholar. Went to that kick-off event at Heathrow. And this quote from gov.uk sums it up quite nicely for anyone who doesn't know what Generation Aviation is. So the group works with the Department for Transport to help to build an aviation workforce fit for the future, attracting diverse and talented people whilst inspiring the next generation. So why is this necessary? As I've said at multiple points in this presentation, the industry is very fast moving. And I think there's some really hard and fast goals that the industry needs to meet. So for example, net zero 2050, which is the government initiative, the aviation sector does produce a significant amount of carbon. And I think the jobs that's going to create to try and counteract that is going to be huge. So the amount of technology that's being created and invested in at the moment is massive. And there's going to be jobs across the board, not just pilots and engineers, but you know, it's going to be everything. Anything that you can think of in a normal business exists in an aviation business as well. So, and we need probably all of those roles and more. We know that obviously COVID impacted the aviation industry quite significantly. So there's going to be a recovery process from that, which I think the industry is already going through to an extent. And then obviously the demand piece that's going to come with that. So I think we're still anticipating that at the moment, but I couldn't say for sure. Then we also know that there's going to be an aviation professional skills shortage, and that was predicted by Oliver Wyman, and I've read some posts about it in Forbes as well. So mainly around the pilots and aircraft engineers, I think they're predicting a shortage in. But I do think going hand in hand with the net zero goals by 2050, it's going to be across more roles than we're probably going to be aware of. So I think that's going to be pressing in the next few years. I don't have the numbers to hand on what the shortages are, but I know they're significant, and that's why they're being discussed now. Then I just wanted to talk through this last quote from Baroness Veer, who I mentioned earlier. So the aim of Generation Aviation is quite simply to build an aviation workforce fit for the future, a future that can only be realised by a new generation of aviation workers from all corners of the country, representing the rich diversity of modern Britain. I just thought that was great. It's just summed up really nicely. And it's kind of what I'm all about as well. I do think it's so important, and I'm really invested and passionate about this industry because it's given me so much. And I really want to see more diverse backgrounds, people from different parts of the UK, people with different experience, people who might want to consider an aviation career later in life because maybe they were similar to me and steered away from that a little bit at school, but actually they've decided, well, actually no, I want to be an engineer when they're a little bit older, and that's fine. So I think just opening up that space and learning that there really is space for everyone, and that, you know, you might potentially be a role model and you don't even know it, I think is important. So yeah, I think that summed it up quite well. But lots of opportunity coming, I think, from what I understand and from what I've been told. That was what we discussed at this kickoff event at Heathrow. So I think it's a really exciting time, definitely. So that is it. I'm out of breath. So yeah, I might have gone through that a little bit quick. I don't really know how long I was talking there, but I'd love to welcome some questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you very much, Lily. I'm going to stop the recording and then we can sort of take questions. So let me